Well, welcome everyone to Real Balance Global Wellness Services monthly webinars. And thank you for attending today. I want to let you know that all of our webinars are archived at realbalance.com in the Wellness Resources section. And also to let you know that Real Balance Global Wellness Services has trained thousands of health and wellness coaches all around the world. We're continuing with our live interactive webinar classes, which have been very well attended. And want to let you know that we are approved by the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching, which I am a board member emeritus of and one of the founding members of, and also approved by the International Coach Federation, not just for continuing ed, but for approved coach-specific training hours that you can earn toward your ICF credential. We're also able to grant continuing education credits for these webinars. And if you're interested in that, please contact Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, at realbalance.com. Well, this month we've got a fabulous guest talking about a very important topic. And the way this works, just let you know, is that we're going to have you muted upon entry here, and you're going to be able to use the Q&A function to add to the discussion, and we're going to save at least 10 minutes at the end for that in particular. But right now, I really want to, first of all, introduce Dr. Rikkisha Gilmore Byrd, Ricky, as she loves to be called.
Yeah.
Welcome. How are you doing?
Thanks. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah.
A little bit, did you want me to tell a little bit about me?
Well, yeah, tell you what, let me just give you the little bit of introduction, and then
Okay.
you can
Okay.
fill in from there, because I'm just going to say that you are Dean of Rasmussen College in Minnesota, and it was my pleasure to work with Dr. Byrd to do a presentation about a month ago, I think it was at this point, for IFEVP, Employee Benefits, and the Art and Science of Health Promotion. They've kind of combined efforts to create special forums and conferences. And we presented on this topic and just had a terrific response to it. It was really great to get this word out, and especially in the wellness coaching community. So please add to that, Ricky.
I don't have much to add. I'm excited to be here. As you mentioned, I'm a dean at Rasmussen College. I oversee the School of Education, the School of Justice Studies, and the Human Services programs. I also do some health coaching part-time, and absolutely, absolutely love it. And I'm excited to be here with you all today just to talk about how important it is to infuse cultural humility into your coaching.
So let's go ahead and get that discussion underway. And take it away, Ricky.
Sure. So I've had a lot of people that have asked me about infusing cultural humility into anything. You can infuse cultural humility into your everyday life. But today we're going to talk specifically about what culture is and what cultural humility is, as many of you have probably not even heard of it. Most people are trained on and learn to recognize the terms cultural competence. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why we want to move beyond cultural competence. Not to say cultural competence is not important, it absolutely is, but we'll talk about why it's important to kind of evolve beyond cultural competence, especially when you're working directly with people. So we can move on. So the first question that I have for you all, and I can't see the chat, so when you think about what culture is, what do you think culture is? And some of the things that I have on the screen are that culture is a definition that's highly misunderstood and misused. Many people use the term culture and they're not thinking about what it really is. Culture is more than race and ethnicity, but when people talk about their culture, many times that's really what they're talking about, their race or ethnicity, their gender. Those are the ones that kind of jump out at you when you think about culture. Culture refers to the following ways of life, including but not limited to language. That's one of the main ones. You know, what language you speak. I can say one word to you, and it's an English word, but the connotation might be different based on your culture and how you've learned language. Culture, language is your medium of expression. So when you think about culture, the way that we express things directly is related to how we have been brought up, our lived experiences. Arts and sciences, our thoughts are all related to culture. Spirituality is a really, really big one. And a lot of times when we hear the word spirituality, similarly, we automatically think of religion, and spirituality is not religion. A religion can be part of your spirituality, but spirituality is so much more than that. And the way that one expresses their spirituality can directly be related to how they view their health and wellness, and how they incorporate that into their lives. Social activity, interaction, all of these things are collectively part of one's culture. And I always like to say that culture is a totality of all learned behaviors. And some people don't, when they think about that, they think about, hey, well, my culture is not something I've learned. But really it is, because just because you might have the same race as someone next to you does not necessarily mean that your beliefs are the same and that your culture is directly mirror to what theirs may be. And one example I tend to use is, you can look at people within the same household. I use myself and my sister as an example. We grew up in the same household, had many of the same lived experiences as a child, but our culture is not the mirrored same. We have some similar beliefs, but we're very different in many ways. The way that we view the world is very different. And you'll notice that also in households where maybe you're health coaching with multiple people. I've worked with a mother and their child before, as well as a husband and wife, and their culture was actually pretty different. So that's just something to kind of think about as we're talking about working with people.
Mm-hmm.
You can go on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can see the chat. So Sherry said, culture is the totality of my life experiences consciously and unconsciously. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a whole separate training on unconscious bias, because it's not something that we can really cover in just 5 minutes, which is what I've allotted, with my slides on each topic. So unconscious bias is something that we all have. It's impossible not to have some bias. The main thing about unconscious bias is bringing those unconscious biases to the consciousness, to your consciousness.
Right.
When you do that, then you can address those unconscious biases. But we'll talk about that a little bit as we move on. But let's look at some of these things that go back real quick. Some of these things that are part of our culture. Life experiences is the one that I just pointed out, and Sherry mentioned. That's huge. We don't realize sometimes that life experiences shape how we work with others, how we interact with others, all of those things, as well as some of these others that you would probably assume would be part of one's culture. So we'll move on now.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple points about culture. Culture can merge and change. So it's not static.
Mm-hmm.
The lived experiences part that we just mentioned is a big part of how we kind of evolve, and our interactions with others can help us to change our mindset. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Culture.
Wouldn't you say, Ricky, that you've seen a tremendous change in culture in your lifetime? I know I have in mine.
I absolutely have. And the person that I was even excuse me, even a year ago is different than the person I am now, based on what we've all lived through, a pandemic. We've all lived through some injustices that have happened in this country, and it's shaped how we see the world. It
Mm-hmm.
also has shaped how we see others. Automatically, whether, and this goes back to the kind of unconscious, automatically, whether we, agree with police officers or anything that happened, we view them in a different light. Maybe we never even thought about police officers before, but now we're starting to kind of look at how they interact with everyone that we see them interacting with. One of the programs that I oversee, ironically, as a dean, is law enforcement in Minnesota. And let me tell you, we've had to address our curriculum. We've had to look to see what we're teaching police officers and how we can change. That is just an example of how it changes and emerges. Another point is that cultural values may be expressed a little different based on the different circumstances. So when we are health coaching with our clients, their values, sometimes they may not feel like they can share them with us because they, one, may assume because we may not look like them, we may not understand. Number two, they may assume that because we do look like them, we automatically are going to know what their cultural values are. But just like I pointed out, culture is not the same necessarily between two individuals. It's also linked to conditions that surround a person, like we just talked about, the economy and politics. That helps to evolve and change your cultural norms and how you see the world. And like I already said, it's not a person's race or their ethnicity. It's so much more.
Ricky, as you're explaining this, what I'm really becoming aware of is in health and wellness coaching, we're always working with the person's lifestyle, their way of living. And all the things you're talking about have tremendous impact on all of those. So they're going to end up having tremendous impact on all their health and wellness choices about how to live their lives.
Absolutely. And how do we get them to open up about how their cultural norms affect their health and wellness? And we'll talk a little bit about that.
Great.
So culture is like an iceberg. And many of you probably have heard about this. You can only see about 10% of it. 90% of it is hidden to our naked eye. When you think about an iceberg, it builds until it is breaking the water's surface. And when we interact with people daily, we can only see the outside. Now, when we're health and wellness coaching, we do get a chance to kind of get down below the surface because our clients will share things with us, and we get to learn some of what's under that surface. Sometimes they really don't, and then we're kind of trying to help them navigate their health and wellness based on sometimes just what they give us, and that's sometimes can cause some complications in health and wellness coaching. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, the matter of trust is, and am I going to be judged?
Yep.
I'm going to share something about my life and my culture, my way of doing things. It's maybe different than yours, so you can have some judgment about that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we need to, as we are building rapport, which all of you have been certified in health coaching, I'm assuming, health and wellness coaching, and you have learned how to build rapport, and you've learned how to really work with your clients. But it's building rapport, sometimes we think about is right at the beginning. We don't think about the fact that we have to continue to build rapport. We have to continue to be open so that the client feels like they are in an environment of inclusion. And to help them feel included is the only way to help get them to really open up and share aspects of their culture that absolutely affect their health and wellness and how they do things in their lifestyle, like you mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So multiculturalism, which is what we kind of strive to have, is the coexistence of diverse cultures where culture includes all of these things that we've talked about, and it's manifested into customary behaviors, cultural assumptions, values, patterns of thinking, and communicative styles. So even when you're working with your clients, a lot of times we automatically assume that, this person has signed up for health and wellness coaching, whether we're coaching them in person or a lot of us right now are coaching remotely, that they are comfortable communicating by talking, because that's mainly what we're doing, right? They're also comfortable communicating with technology, as many of us have embraced the fact that we need technology right now, as we're not able to interact in the same way we were before the pandemic. But sometimes that can be a barrier, assuming that they are comfortable talking to us, and that may not be something that they are necessarily used to in their culture. That it's some cultures absolutely don't feel comfortable with their main communication style being sharing things through talking. So how can you change your approach to help meet them where they are? Health and wellness coaching is all about meeting that client where they are. So start to think about how you can meet them where they are.
You know, the word that you keep using that points in the direction of where we really mess up is that word assumption.
Assumptions.
And, you know,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of great sayings about that word,
Yep. Yep.
and they're all true.
Yep. We've all heard that. And getting past making those assumptions is the biggest barrier to being able to really treat people as individuals. And I would be lying to you if I told you, and I have a doctorate in infusing cultural humility, and it's focused on reducing health disparities through cultural humility. But I will be lying to you if I didn't say sometimes I see someone and I've already created a picture in my mind about that person. I've already told myself what their whole life has been. And when I hear them talking about, why they're there for health coaching and how they want to change their wellness, I've already got some preconceived notions. It's automatic. The difference that you can make is stopping yourself, saying, no, I'm not going to allow these assumptions to help or to guide how I work with this client.
Right, exactly. And I love this next slide for how we, once again, those assumptions can work against us so badly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is a slide about microaggressions, and microaggressions, and we'll talk about different types of microaggressions, but microaggressions, it really means things that we sometimes will say to people, and we don't think we're being mean or offensive. In fact, we think that we're opening ourselves up to talking to them
Mhm.
and listening to what they're going to tell us. But when we start with, no, but where are you really from? Does that make you, if somebody said that to you, would that make you feel that you were in an environment where were not being judged?
Mhm.
If someone says to you, I'm from Louisiana, but you know that that's not where their ethnicity might have originally brought them from, but they're from Louisiana. So to ask them, but no, where are you really from? It's offensive. And
Yeah.
assuming someone, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, you know, like a great example here in Colorado is you can meet a person that appears to be of Hispanic origin,
Yep, that was my
and you
next
might
one.
make this really, big assumption, and then you inquire and you find out that their family has been in Colorado, a Spanish word, for like 200 to 300 years.
Yep, yep. Yep. And you can assume that they speak Spanish, which is the next
Oh,
one. And they don't.
yeah,
And
right.
quite honestly, the world is, and especially in the United States, there are so many people mixing races and ethnicity. There are so many people that I look at and they're racially ambiguous. I have no idea what
Mhm.
they are and what their ethnicity is. And it doesn't matter. And I shouldn't be assuming that I know what it is.
Mhm.
The next one is a transgender person, and it says, did you have the surgery? First of all, that's not your business. That's not something that you say to someone. And in your mind, you might think, and I'm not saying this about everybody, sometimes we are afraid to admit when we're ignorant. And ignorance is not a bad word. It means that we have not been educated on something. So asking questions is not, I'm not telling you shouldn't ask questions, but you have to think about how you're asking those questions. So because someone is transgender does not necessarily mean that they are going to have sex reassignment surgery. It's not our business. But
Mhm.
inquiring about their life can be done so that you are practicing cultural humility without being offensive. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The next one says, why do you sound white? I've actually experienced that many times myself. People have had interactions with me on the phone, and then they see me and they say, wait a minute, I didn't think you'd be black. And that's offensive. It really is. We just don't know, and we cannot make assumptions. Yes, Sherry asked if I can talk more about the term racially ambiguous. What my point is when you look at somebody, you cannot tell what their race is, and that's what I mean by ambiguous. You just don't know. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they don't have a race or that it's not there. It's just in terms of just the outer appearance.
I think what we can hope for when we do some sort of faux pas is the kindness of that other person to, just be tolerant enough of our ignorance
Absolutely.
and be kind to us and not take it personally and feel hurt.
Right.
But we don't have control of that. What we say might really hurt.
Right.
Yeah. So tell us about different types of microaggressions. This
Absolutely.
is an important term.
It absolutely is, and I encourage you all to go and look at this website, as it will explain more than I have time to really explain about microaggressions. But microassaults are more purposeful actions of discrimination, like calling someone an offensive name. And there are many examples of that. Micro insults are really subtle communications. Those that we looked at, most of those are micro insults. They demean a person's cultural identity, but you don't necessarily mean to do it. Micro invalidations are subtle communications that negate a person's cultural reality. And it comes from saying, I don't see color. When you say that you don't see color, when you try not to see color, you miss so much of one's identity. And we'll talk about that. I have a slide that's specific to what you miss when you say you don't see color.
Okay.
So why I feel like cultural competency is not a bad word, but we should move beyond it, is that cultural competency beliefs can go wrong, because cultural competency implies that we are learning about a certain culture. And many people will read, go to trainings or read books on specific cultures, let's say races. I know that I've been through many graduate courses many years ago where we're focused on learning how to, one of my masters is in counseling, learning how to counsel African American students or African Americans. There's not one way to counsel African Americans. You can't learn everything about African Americans by reading about them. You can't learn one thing about working with women by reading about them. You can't learn about working with transgender people by reading about them. And that's where sometimes those assumptions based on the stereotypes can lead us astray. So you can move on to the next one. So I like this slide because I like to say I am not a stereotype. So think about you. When you think about, and I know I'm getting a lot of comments and questions, but we'll have to come back to them because I know that we want to end 10 minutes before. So I'm not ignoring you, but I'm gonna move on. So when I think about myself and what someone may, the iceberg part that someone may look at and assume about me, I know I'm not the stereotype of what someone may see. And this just shows an example on, what.
Whoops. Looks like Ricky's internet has frozen. I hope she has enough bandwidth to pull
very,
back.
very different. They are very, very different. And
just to let you know, Ricky, your internet froze for just a moment there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So hopefully, things will roll along good now.
Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Well, you were just going to explain,
Okay, I was just explaining how, and I'm not sure when I cut out, but I was just explaining how many times when we look at someone, we are not the stereotype or that we read about. So
Right.
that goes back to assumptions. I encourage you to look at yourself. Go and read some of the stereotypes about yourself and compare what's actually true. And you can honestly Google stereotypes about women, stereotypes about uh, Black people, whatever your actual culture affiliations are, Google it and see what the stereotypes are and see if you actually fit into that.
So what's a stereotype anyway?
It's the idea that many people have about a thing or a group that may often be untrue, or sometimes it is partly true, or sometimes it's true about some people that fit into that culture, but not others. So it's just not reliable to rely on a stereotype.
Yeah, I think we all encounter people where we might say, boy, are they working hard to live up to the stereotype,
I've heard that. Yes, yes. I
and
like
then,
that you pointed that out.
yeah, and then of course it's like mind blowing how, you know, invalid that is if we keep it up,
Yep.
Yeah. Mhm. So let's bring it home to health and wellness coaching.
Yes. So now I've kind of set the foundation. So why is it important to overall health? Why is culture important to overall health and health coaching, health and wellness coaching? Health in general is directly impacted many times by our cultural affiliations. So
Mhm.
as you mentioned, our lifestyle and
Right.
our health is typically very, very related, and it's intertwined. Our lifestyle is intertwined into our health and our health status, and the things that we do that are very healthy versus the things that we do that are um, normally looked at as not so healthy, and our overall wellness, that is both physical, that is both mental. All of our wellness is impacted by our culture.
One of the big topics that came out of the wellness field very early on was peer health norms. And the norms of our behavior are so impacted by family, by
Absolutely.
culture, by subculture, how we identify. And it ends up showing up in terms of giving ourselves permission to do something or not, whether we eat this or whether we eat that, or how
Right.
often we do, all
Right.
kinds of things.
Right. And sometimes when we are trying to give feedback and or assistance or suggestions to our clients, we don't necessarily think about how it will affect their culture. So for me to say to someone, oh, well, you need to stop eating by 7 o'clock every night because that's just the best thing to do. I don't know how their lifestyle and their cultural affiliations, how that might impact them. So I should never be telling them what they
Right.
should do.
Right.
And that goes back to basic health coaching.
Yep. I always say, if you can throw out the words, you need to, you ought to, you should, I want you to, from your entire coaching vocabulary, you're
Yes.
going to do a better job.
Yes, I agree. One thing I honestly struggle with when I'm health coaching is I automatically say we we should, or why don't we, and it's not we, this is their life, they're in control of what they're doing. So why am I, because I'm such an empath that I'm acting like I'm right there on their shoulder as they are making their eating choices, their exercise choices, and their lifestyle choices. So we always have room to grow, and that's part of cultural humility as well.
And
So,
catching yourself. Yeah.
yep. So cultural competence, really quick, is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system, agency, or among professionals and enable that system to work effectively in cross-cultural situation. It implies knowledge of an entire culture, which is impossible. And this is why I try to always say, I don't want to be culturally competent because I can't. I shouldn't even strive to be culturally competent because competency implies an endpoint that we are. It's done. Not that, and obviously it's never done. We're always learning when we're talking about culture. It's impossible to know everything about everyone.
Can I try out a metaphor on you?
Sure. Let me see.
Maybe understanding someone's culture is looking at a landscape, but realizing that as you walk across that landscape, if you're not really culturally have an attitude of cultural humility, there are landmines out there that you might be stepping on, because here's the exception to that, generalization about that culture. Do all Asian people, are they all highly educated? Are they all reluctant to talk to people outside their family?
Yep.
You're going to meet so many that absolutely aren't. That, well, okay, why did I learn that anyway?
Right. Right. And that's why that's the issue I have with cultural competence. I literally just got out of a cultural humility training because I always try to see what other people are training on earlier today. And there was a woman of Asian descent in the training, and she said people come up to me because she works at a hospital. People come up to her all the time and they assume she's a doctor. And she's not.
Mm.
And they assume because she's of Asian descent, she's so smart and she's so intelligent. And she said she couldn't even pass math. So it's, I mean, she was being funny, but it's
Yeah, yeah,
those assumptions that cultural
yeah,
competence sometimes kind of implies.
exactly. So we've got to keep working at this.
Yes. So why do I like cultural humility? So let me explain what cultural humility is. It's a lifelong process of self-reflection, self-critique, continual assessment of power imbalances, and the development of mutually respectful relationships and partnerships. So that says a lot. So let's break that down. Let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's talk about the principles of cultural humility. First of all, it's lifelong learning. Lifelong learning means I can't take a class in cultural competence. I can't take a class in, working with, as I mentioned earlier, working with people of Asian descent. I can't take a class on working with Americans. I can't take a gender studies class and know how to work with everybody that might fit into that box.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly learning about people in general, and it's critical self-reflection. Like I said earlier, we all have biases. So as competent or humble as I like to imagine I am, I have biases. There's no way around it. So it's that self-reflection of checking yourself. Like I mentioned earlier, of me saying, hey, I don't need to automatically assume that because that person identifies as Muslim, that they don't eat on this day, or they, fast for this long. I can't make that assumption because everybody is different. We have to also recognize and challenge power imbalances. Many times we don't realize that when we are working in a health coaching environment, people are automatically looking at us as the authority figure. Even though we try to set up dynamics that we're working together, we're their cheerleader, we're just advocating for them, we're working with them, they are the experts of their life. They are making those choices every day. But when they call us, or when they come to see us to check in, to talk to us about what's going on with their health and wellness, they're looking at us like an authority figure. So we have to recognize that and let that kind of guide how we interact with our clients.
Yeah, part of building that coaching alliance is really kind of explaining, I'm going to be working with you in a different way than most consultants have worked with you before. You're used to going to people who are an expert in medicine or an expert in fitness or nutrition. I'm going to be working with you in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And it really takes a little while for people to understand that. And
Right.
then once they do, wow, then it
Right.
takes.
Right. I love that you pointed that out. And sometimes we wear several hats. Sometimes we are psychologists, and sometimes we are doctors or medical professionals. But when we are working with somebody as their health coach, we also have to kind of put that hat aside sometimes to say, what is my role right now?
Right.
Also, there's institutional accountability within cultural humility, and that goes more towards if you're health coaching for yourself, if you're health coaching for an institution, how do they view cultural humility, and what kind of dynamics do they put in place for you to be able to practice cultural humility? And many times the forms that we have to fill out, or the expectations of the institution don't set us up to be as successful as we may like to be in practicing cultural humility.
Mhm. So what are some of these different dimensions of cultural humility, and how can we fit that into our coaching?
Love it. When you decide that you want to become more culturally humble, first of all, recognize that humility comes from being humble. How can you show that you're humble? Number one, practice that lifelong learning. Don't ever think that you already know the answers. We already talked about that. I'm bringing that point home. Be comfortable with not knowing. I have been in situations where I've worked with someone and they say, I am part of the emo culture, and I had to say, I have no idea what that is. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Can you
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about, how that affects your health and wellness? Be okay with asking questions without insulting someone. By letting them know, one of the things that I say to clients, I love to say is, you are the expert on yourself. So I'm not going to assume that I know anything about you. Can you tell me? That sets up a foundation where, hey, I feel kind of good about myself. I may not be an expert in anything else. And quite honestly, a lot of people, when they're coming to us for health and wellness coaching, not all, but a lot, they feel like they are without some things.
Mhm.
And they're coming to us to help them with some things. They might feel low about themselves and about some of the things that they're doing. They may be embarrassed. Letting them know you are the expert on you already sets up a dynamic of empowerment for them. So that's why I find it's really nice to let them know from the beginning they're the expert on them, and that I will ask them questions about them so that I can help them help themselves.
I think one of the cornerstones of coaching that the authors of coactive coaching always talk about, the first one is, and I love how they say it, it's not just a concept or a principle, it's a position that we take. We hold our clients to be naturally creative, resourceful, and whole.
Right.
And if I honor someone like that and I think of them that way, that's very different than, okay, you're broken and I'm going to help fix you.
Right. Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
the mindset. It all goes back to mindset. The
Yeah.
mindset that we're coming in with is how they receive it and what they're able to be able to give themselves. I like to say give us, but they're not giving it to us essentially. It's a gift they're giving to themselves. So setting those dynamics, like you said, are extremely important. Already pointed out recognizing dynamics of power and privilege. Sometimes, why I pointed out power. Let's talk very briefly on privilege. Sometimes we don't think about the fact that some of the suggestions we might have, some of the resources we might share, they can imply privilege. I've worked with clients and specifically during this pandemic that were in New York, and me talking to them about fresh vegetables, and they were in the city in impoverished areas. So talking to them about getting these fresh vegetables and the importance of fresh vegetables and fresh fruit. Ooh, couldn't think of the word fruit.
Mhm.
Implies privilege. Some of them did not have access to that at that time. All of those places where they could get fresh things were closed down. During a lot of the riots, those places were burned, and people didn't have a way to get to some of those fresh foods and to eat healthy. Sometimes you think about the fact where, you tell people, well, even if you can't get to a gym, just go outside and take a brisk walk. Or what if I don't live in a safe neighborhood and I
Yeah.
can't do those things?
And see, that's where if you're more client centered in the way
Yeah,
you
yep,
coach,
we're gonna get to that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, you take it, you approach it in a whole different way instead of all these suggestions.
absolutely.
One of the things that I recognize is that usually a beginning coach, one who is not that well skilled in the craft of coaching, doesn't know what to do other than make suggestions.
Right, right.
And the better you get at the craft of coaching,
Hmm.
the less you have to make suggestions or resort to them.
Right. You don't even have to. And that's a
Yeah.
very, very good point. And that goes to that self reflection and critique. Continue to get better. Continue to look at, listen to yourself. If you record your sessions, go back and listen to, hey, what could I have done better? And critique yourself so that you can continue to evolve as a better at your craft. I look at health coaching as an art and a science. You got to have both.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So tell us about this humble model. This is kind of cool acronym.
Yes. So as I said, I love this model because as I said, the foundation of humility is being humble, right? So this is something to help you kind of, and I would encourage you to print this out, put it up next to your workstation. Um, this is just something that kind of points out how you can be humble. Humble about the assumptions you make, understanding your own, breaking the acronym down, understanding your own background and culture, because our own culture affects how we work with others. And it doesn't have to, because we can check ourselves when we see it happening. Motivate yourself to learn about the other person's background. Remember, we talked about asking questions, setting up that the dynamics that they're the expert on themselves. Begin to incorporate the knowledge into your work. Like you just mentioned, you continue to evolve and you continue to learn and to become a better coach by incorporating what you learned each time you coach somebody different. Lifelong learning, it never stops. You have to continue to learn about people and how to work with people. That's why this continuing education is always really, really important. And emphasizing respect and negotiate service plans. What does that mean? The service plans, and I don't know why I have a question mark there. That's an error. But service plans can mean whatever your institution or whoever you're health coaching, whatever they have in place. So you can take service plans out and use coaching plans or whatever it is that you use. It's always different.
Mm-hmm. You know, what this brings up for me is the advice that I'm constantly giving coaches to do your best to coach the widest variety of people possible,
Yes.
especially as you're learning coaching, because
Yes.
your clients are your greatest teachers.
Absolutely.
They
It's
really are.
invaluable.
So, you know, do your best to coach someone that is like 180-degree different life than you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, in every dimension, every you know, demographic you can think of,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll learn so much more. Now, I do want to mention someone who was asking about access to the slides, because you've got a lot of great information here. And you can definitely do that. I'll give you information at the end there so you can email me. The other thing that is kind of the new way to take notes, take a picture of this screen with your phone.
Yep.
A lot of people
I didn't
doing
even
that
think about
in
that.
classes
Yep.
now.
Yep.
A lot of people in our classes are doing that. You know, all of a sudden they're just, you know, whoop, you know,
Yep. Yep.
they got it.
And I'm sure you can pass on my email address to anybody that has
Yeah.
additional questions or wants to talk through it any further.
Yeah, we'll do that at the end here. Sounds great. Okay, so explain this big graph to us.
Yes. So talks a little bit about the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. So when we are practicing cultural humility, we are holding systems accountable. Like I told you, sometimes our systems do not put us in a place of power in terms of how to be humble. So when you feel like your institution, and if you work for yourself, then hey, you have full control. But when you feel like your institution may not be putting you in a situation where you can be humble enough to make your clients feel like they are included and there's real equity there, then that will help the whole institution, which helps all your clients that come later. You also need to understand, like I said, and readdress those power and privilege imbalances where we talked about. But when we go back to cultural competence, and this is why being culturally competent and practicing cultural humility together is really where it's at. And you mentioned that when we presented before, because you know we were kind of talking back and forth between cultural humility and cultural competence, and you said, well, why not both? Yes, why not both? Just realize that competence is not an endpoint. You are learning, you're starting to learn about something by gaining the cultural knowledge. That's part of the cultural competence model, by learning about others, by developing that cultural self-awareness, coming back to yourself. And like you said, continuing to work with others so that you, all different types of people, so that
Right.
you learn more and more, but still remembering that everyone is an individual.
Would it be kind of like this, Ricky, where if I'm a student of cultural competence and I'm doing my best to learn about the variety of people that I am working with, my coach approach way of implementing that is to kind of know that, but then check it out.
Check it out. Love
And
that.
because does this person, are they, most of this research about culture, about gender, about all this stuff, it's what I call 60-40 research.
Oh, yes.
60% of the people, yeah, that's their story. You
Right.
know what? 40% is a big
It's
percentage.
huge.
And
Right.
that's where it's not their story.
Right. Right. Very good points. The next slide, we'll talk about the shortcomings and strengths of cultural competence and cultural humility. And I know that you're going to make the slides available because I don't have time to really dissect some of the differences. But one of the points that I'll point out is just the goals, where cultural competence is to build an understanding of minority cultures, but if you're in that minority, then it might be a majority culture, so you have to kind of flip it based on who you are, to better and more appropriately provide services.
Mhm.
Whereas cultural humility is to encourage personal reflection and growth around culture in order to increase you as a service provider's awareness. Although we don't necessarily look at ourselves as service providers, because that's not the exact role that we are still providing a service, our health and wellness coaching. So if you look at it from that lens, that's the importance of cultural humility as it relates to our clients. I love this slide because I pointed this out earlier, but sometimes when I'm doing a FaceTime with a client, they look at me and they automatically assume that I understand their cultural norms because I'm Black. Like we said, that I don't necessarily do what you do and you don't necessarily do what I do. So
Mhm.
just because a health coach may look like they belong to the same culture as the client does not mean that they do. And keep that in your mind when sometimes we're in autopilot. That's how we get through life. And when
Yeah.
we're busy, we automatically default to autopilot. And that autopilot is assumptions. I like to try to check myself before I work with a new client. I try to erase my brain, make it a clean slate, so that I'm not trying to take shortcuts by being in autopilot.
Yeah. I'll give you a little example. In one of our classes, we had a student who was from Tennessee, and she had one of the thickest Appalachian accents that I've encountered in a long time. And I love hearing
I
accents.
do too.
But it was so easy to get into that thinking that, well, she's a white person from Appalachia, probably not that well educated. Hell, she had a master's degree from Vanderbilt. Come on,
Wow.
give me a break here. And when she spoke in class, she was, just as sharp as everybody, of
Yep.
course.
Yep.
So there's where you could, totally um, limit what
Absolutely.
would happen between the two of you because of that bias and that assumption.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we do it sometimes when people um, don't seem like they're speaking intelligently. And
Uh,
sometimes it can be a language barrier, and sometimes,
yeah.
but that does not necessarily have anything to do with their intelligence. And
Right.
I do it. I'm huge on grammar, and when somebody sends me an email, and obviously it's because I'm an educator. When somebody sends me an email with all these grammatical errors, in my
Right.
mind I automatically go to, oh my gosh, this person. But it can be so many things. In the age of technology, a lot of people are
Oh,
sending emails from their devices,
yes.
and it doesn't catch grammar. So we just have to be more open and not make assumptions.
Exactly.
So, as you already mentioned, you already kind of gave a teaser that if you're doing person-centered coaching correctly, you're automatically coaching with cultural humility.
Yeah.
When you're doing it right, you're right.
Mhm.
So you want to, I like this as a cute little acronym about coaching: connect and commit, open with objectives, assess, affirm, and appreciate who that person is, create a plan, and honor the how. So you all will get a chance to look at these slides, but I know we're right at time and there's still a couple more slides.
Yeah, this one's important. So give time.
Yes. This is one of my favorites. This is why, we can't say, I don't see color. Or I shouldn't say we can't. We shouldn't say I don't
It
see
doesn't
color.
matter. It doesn't matter, right?
You have to be able to acknowledge and color and take out color and put in gender, and take out color and put in, whatever, sexuality, whatever the person is that you actually know about them. Because sometimes we don't know. There's so many invisible aspects of one's culture. But when we take that out, we are ignoring part of that person that is very, very important. It limits your ability to really appreciate who that person is and their individualism. And I know I've heard some people say, well, we all bleed red blood. Yes, but we're not all the same. Our blood is not our brain. Our blood is not our heart. Our blood is not who we are. So I understand why you want to feel like you should get to that point, but when you do, you completely erase that person as an individual. And we all might as well be, I don't know if you remember the movie The Stepford Wives. We automatically we should just be Stepford Wives. We don't have a personality. We're robots. And we're not. That's not who we are. That's not who people are. So you have to see aspects of one's culture to really appreciate them.
Ricky, a lot of what you've been talking about today is what I would call yes and instead of
Love
either
that.
or.
Love that. Love that.
That's a lot of what you're saying here. And let's get into the responses now by people. Okay. You can use the Q&A function. That's really probably the best way to do this. Or you can use the chat function. I know we've had some things in there already. One person was mentioning, nor can you make assumptions about millennials or boomers.
Right.
I'll tell you, as an ancient person myself, this okay boomer thing, boy, is that condescending.
It is.
Which is really weird to encounter. Fortunately, I haven't had that thrown in my face yet.
Oh, my daughter says it to me all the time. Okay, boomer. I'm very offended.
Well, it's anything that comes across dismissive.
Absolutely.
Nobody likes to be dissed, right?
Right. That's true.
In any way, shape, or form.
That's true.
Yeah. So what's the number one way we can make a substantial difference when it comes to infusing cultural humility in our health coaching sessions?
Love that.
Any questions that might be helpful to ask to our clients?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing that you can do is set the stage by what I mentioned, letting them know from the beginning, you are an expert on yourself. So I may ask you questions about yourself because I don't want to make assumptions. Put it out there, because then when you are asking them questions, they're not taking it as, something that could be considered offensive. Now, obviously, you want to make sure you're asking them in a way that makes them feel included, and that you are not offending them or dissing them, like you said. But setting the stage makes them, number one, feel empowered. Number two, be ready for your questions about them.
Right. Ricky, would you be willing to share the example you gave in our last webinar about coaching an Indian woman?
I don't know if I remember it.
About vegetarianism?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Great example.
Yes.
Great example.
I was working with a woman who was of Indian descent, and I was on autopilot. Like I said, sometimes, when we're busy, we're on autopilot. So we're going through her plan and setting goals. And one of the goals that I typically, when I'm focused specifically on weight loss, I have them set a goal that's focused on their eating, their exercise, and their self-care. So it was time for her eating goal. And this is the first time I've met with her, right? And she had mentioned earlier, so I wasn't making an assumption that she was Indian. She had mentioned earlier that she was Indian. And I said, oh, and so you're Indian, so I know that you're vegetarian. So what should your eating goals be for the week? And she said, wait a minute, I'm not a vegetarian. And I was like, ah, I just did what I teach not to do. And this is what you have to be humble. I had
Yeah.
to be humble enough to know I made a mistake. I literally, like I said, have a doctorate in this, and I made a mistake.
Hmm.
That's constant self-reflection, that going back, and I had to say to her, I am so sorry. I made a mistake. The thing is that when we make those mistakes, we sometimes don't realize just how impactful they are. Because I made a mistake, I acknowledged and I apologized for my mistake, but she still didn't feel comfortable with me continuing to be her health coach.
Yeah.
I had destroyed that relationship with one sentence.
You know, I love you sharing that because, it's kind of like, well, geez, if you can mess up like that, I know I'm probably going to mess up too, that kind of thing. I have a really good question here that would probably apply to everybody here from Lindsay. She's saying that she's setting up her own coaching business. It's going to be doing teleconferencing and stuff. And in the spirit of recognizing color, is it appropriate to include questions about the race and ethnicity in the client questionnaire prior to beginning the coaching relationship?
I personally don't feel like it's necessary
Mhm.
unless you need it for some sort of reporting reasons. And if you're health coaching for yourself, I don't feel like asking them their race or ethnicity is important. Now, when you meet with them, you might get into it as you're building rapport, but I am automatically turned off when I'm filling out paperwork unless it's something, again, where it's necessary, maybe a health document or something where it's actually necessary. I'm offended when somebody asks my race. So you have to decide based on, and I don't know the dynamics of the business you're setting up. So maybe it is something that's necessary. But you have to decide if it is worth you putting on that initial paperwork, or you asking it when you're having your initial interview and intake.
Let me see if I can get at this next one. It's a big one, but I think it's
Okay.
getting some important stuff. I had someone bring up this topic about not seeing color, gender, et cetera, to me, and defend it by pointing out that it is the pride in having a different or superior identity that separates people and causes a divide in the human nation. If everyone sees everyone as human and avoids putting labels and identities, wouldn't that help to avoid conflicts and judgment? We can't be judged if we are all human. Is it the I am blank, quote unquote, that separates us and pits us against each other? I've never thought of that before, but I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Any advice?
I go back to the I don't see color slide.
Mm-hmm.
That is, as much as we would like to believe we can ever be in a world where we're all the same, we are not. And when we try to embrace each other as all the same, we are dismissing so much about who a person is. And it's that diversity that
Mm-hmm.
shapes the way that this world is run. Number one, when we have a conflict, and I'm going to be very brief, but if we have a conflict and we go to discuss this conflict with people that are in our circle, they all think like us, they all believe like us, we're all the same, but we've already been trying to use those conflict resolution skills that we all know because we've all worked together. And I ask somebody in that same circle, can you help me with this conflict? They're going to tell me the same thing I've already done. When I'm able to embrace somebody else's cultural knowledge based on their lived experiences, it helps me look outside of my box,
Mm-hmm.
because we can't live everything. It's impossible. But the experiences that we share with others and talk about and are exposed to help shape who we are. So that's why looking at everybody the same is counterproductive.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you, you've covered a lot of ground and such important stuff. I really am very appreciative of having you here to be on this webinar with us. This is the kind of information that all coaches really need to know, really need to think about, and constantly keep on learning and growing about. You know, that's the big point you're making.
Absolutely.
So
Thanks for having
please,
me.
oh, very much our pleasure. And like Ricky, would you like to give people your email? I can.
Sure. You
I
want me
can
to just put it in the chat?
actually tell you what. Let me. Yeah, yeah, go ahead and put it in the chat. That would probably be the quickest, easiest thing to do.
Got it. I'm on
Okay.
it.
And if you want to stay in touch with us and think about us for your health and wellness coach training, please do. Now, next October 30th, we will have our next webinar. We're still pulling together a topic there. But please stay connected. We get a newsletter out to over 22,000 people at realbalance.com. You sign up for it there. I've also got a blog with over 120 blogs that are all relevant articles on health and wellness coaching. And that's at realbalancewellness.wordpress.com, or you can find a connection on our regular Real Balance website. So please join with us next month, and feel free to give us a call or email. If you want to email us for more information about this topic or about these slides and so forth, probably the best way, I'll put together a PDF of the slides if you want me to, Ricky. That might be the best route to go, and make that available to people. So thank you everybody for your participation. And we had a really great turnout today, and a lot more people are going to be watching it at their own leisure. So be well. And again, thank you very much, Ricky. Really appreciate it.